What is a complete human? Is it a cover model? Is it a science geek? Is it a fitness expert? Or all of the above and more? Jana and Evan are crusaders that walk the earth looking at today's issues that touch our hearts and minds. The honest and hopeful outlook on the advancement of today's society. The science behind the decay of human relationships. The necessary preparations for future generations. Join us as we look deep inside ourselves and embark on a journey into becoming a complete human.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Complete Human Podcast with your host,
Jana Breslin
and Evan DeMarco. We've talked a lot about meditation, and I think one of the challenges with meditation is that in theory it sounds good, but in practice there's always that, am I doing this right? Or as I say it, what the hell am I doing? And so to a certain extent, I think that there's different types of meditation, there's different practices, but the ultimate goal is usually the same. And what we find is we peel back the layers of meditation and mindfulness in an emerging science of kind of all of this, all of this mindful approach. There are a few people who rise to the top of the list of people that we need to listen to. And in that respect, I'm stoked to introduce our next guest, Lisa Wimberger.
It's so good to be here and talk to you. And I often was like, what the hell am I doing? And am I doing it right as well?
Yeah.
So before we get into that, give our audience a little bit of background, who you are.
Well, I am a survivor of physical trauma, which sort of launched me into neurosculpting. I grew up a meditator. For some strange reason, it was not part of my culture. It was not part of my family. It was just something accidentally taught to me when I was very, very young. And it made sense. So I was always a meditator, but always a dissociator, which later became evident to me, meaning I really wasn't aware of what my body was experiencing. I was very in my head. I was very escapist. And meditation is perfect for people like that. You know, you get to escape and float away. And I loved it. But my body was not loving it. My body was breaking down. I was having weird, anomalous kind of situations in my body. And then I had a traumatic incident at 15 where I was hit by lightning. And that's where everything changed for me. My body started short-circuiting. I started having seizures, vasovagal seizures, which persisted and got worse and worse through the decades. And eventually they became completely life-threatening. I was having bradycardia and then flatlining. I was seizing and, not being able to be resuscitated sometimes. And ultimately, I learned my body's trying to talk to me, and I have not been listening, and I've been escaping, and I need to do something about it. So even though I had other aspirations, right? I was in the corporate world, I was an educator, I was all of these other things. My body told me I needed to be here with it. Meditation, the kind I knew, wasn't getting me there. So I had to go to neuroscience and learn what in the world my nervous system was doing. And what I learned was that, holy moly, my meditation practice was missing a gazillion important things that my nervous system needed in order to make the safe connection between mind and body. And in order for me to be able to process my physical trauma, there was emotional trauma underneath it that I had no idea about. There were so many layers of traumatic survival coping skills that there was no way I was going to get healthy until I learned about my brain and my nervous system. And that's what landed me here. I mean, I was a corporate person and didn't really think I was going to be where I am today, which is fanatically committed to helping people have a better experience in their body through safely understanding their nervous system, and then using really methodical, pragmatic tools that cross into the meditation world, but also cross into like behavioral therapy world, and even cross into just somatic experiencing world, putting them all together to get people to experience being a human in their body in a better way. And I guess so that's who I am. Yeah, that's who I am.
I love it. Before we kind of get to a lot of those tools and some things that I know that I'm really excited to listen about, I'd like to kind of take a step back and, you know, obviously getting struck by lightning is a big freaking deal. So I've never actually met anybody who's been struck by lightning. So I'd like to chat a little bit about that. But in my mind, as we talk about some of the issues and kind of your post-trauma experience, being struck by lightning, seems like such an energetic trauma. And I'd really be interested to talk about how in all of your research, you know, maybe you paired the energetic trauma of that kind of energetic force to your body and then, you know, kind of all of the subsequent issues that came after that.
Yeah. Um, it was a big deal, although I was so amazingly dissociated just by my nature that I even rationalized that it didn't happen, even though there were 8 witnesses and the boy standing next to me, he got hit as well. So it was a stormy day on my birthday, and we took shelter. A group of us kids took shelter under someone's awning, and I was standing against a garage door handle. It was that long crank kind of handle, metal, and it was at the base of my spine, and he was standing next to me, shoulder to shoulder. We were dripping wet from the rain, so I'm guessing highly conductive, and side of the house gets hit and comes out, probably in part, not entirely, because I think I might be dead if it wasn't the entire charge, comes out through the garage door handle. And we fly. Like, all I remember is flying through the air. I'm parallel to the ground and I'm flying, and we both land feet away from the garage door in the dirt, face first. And there's a ring of friends around us, mouths open, eyes wide, screaming, "You got hit. You got hit by lightning. You guys flew through the air." And what I remember was extreme pain in the base of my spine. And I really thought he hit me, but it felt like he hit me with a sledgehammer. I was confused. I didn't believe what they were saying to me. I remember looking at my watch and it had stopped. I remember looking at the watch all night long and going, wow, my watch stopped. But I was conscious. And so my mind's like, no, this didn't happen. I'd be dead if it happened. They got us up, they got us home. I was completely dissociated, and there was my birthday cake on the table when we got home to my friend's house. And I was like, okay, guess it's time to eat cake. Totally not present to them being shooken up and me being like, nope, didn't happen. But then I started having seizures, probably, I'm not sure if this first seizure or fainting, as I used to think it was happening that weekend or a week later, but I started having these blackout spells where I would wake up on the ground and feel like, oh, I must have fainted. But probably within a year or two, those blackout spells became extremely difficult to come out of. So to get back to your question about the energetics of it, there was absolutely a shift. In fact, everything changed in that moment. I wasn't aware of the magnitude of that energetic shift. It wasn't just physiological, it was, an energetic shift of something got inflamed that started working its way into the story of who I was. And the story of who I was becoming, I'm a person who could exit at any moment, because the seizures would happen at random times. I couldn't make rhyme or reason out of them. I didn't have a diagnosis. They often happened when I was alone. So I started developing this like very undercurrent energetic feeling that I don't know if I'm going to be here tomorrow. And so for many years that kept me even more dissociated, because it definitely was not okay for me to be in my body or to trust it or to rely on it. So I became very heady, very dissociated, very analytical, all great things. They served me very well. But that then spiraled into more things going wrong with my body that I was not aware of until they smacked me in the face hard. So when you're not connected to your body, it has to scream at you for you to listen, versus being very connected where it can just subtly poke you and you're like, oh, I hear you, let me address that. So I was having all this chronic crazy stuff. I was having kidney issues. I was having, hypoglycemia. I was having all these things that were just completely short-circuiting me. And it was only until it would level me that I would say, oh, I guess something's wrong, but I can muscle through. I literally tap danced through my appendix about to rupture. Like, that's how dissociated I was at the time. So energetically, I exited even more to this somatic experience. And that only works for so long, until your body has screamed in so many different directions that it says, I'm done. And that's the point that I woke up to needing to cultivate a relationship with the body. And in that cultivation, and breaking through my first seizure with the neurosculpting I had developed, old trauma that existed before the lightning strike, that was pre-verbal, that I was never aware of, but always had a subtle sense of, just came out. And whether it was repressed memories, made up memories, I didn't care. I still to this day don't know if any of that was accurate to my recollection. But what came out when I finally started the very transparent dialogue with my body was a lot of stuff I had been burying that primed me to be dissociated in the first place. Lightning inflamed that coping skill. And it wasn't until there was this massive convergence in my body, just like the last 2 seizures I had. If I had been alone, I would have stayed dead, because I was flatlined in both of them. It really took a ton of bricks to fall on me for me to get there. So energetically, exit's the best word I can come up with. I don't know if that makes sense to everybody listening, but I exited for most of my physical life in a way that almost like I put earmuffs on so I couldn't hear the volume of my body experience. And, you can function that way. It just sucks and isn't really rewarding or healthy, and certainly doesn't lend itself to you being there for your loved ones at all. So energetically, that's what was going on for me.
So you go, for even pre-lightning strike to, lightning strike, to this whole, exited experience of your existence, which is a really dissociative, place to be. You've got a daughter, you're married, you've got a career. So how do you, even after a breakthrough like that, how do you break that pattern of such a long disassociative process that, I mean, that's a muscle memory, if there ever is one.
Right.
So how do you even begin to crawl out of that hole?
Yeah, well, there was lead up breaking the pattern that I didn't quite understand the magnitude of what I was doing. So between the second to last seizure and the last seizure I had was about 8 months. And the second to last seizure I had was extremely traumatic. I was taken to the ER. My daughter watched paramedics resuscitate me. That was the second to last one. And at that point, I thought, okay, I have to do something. So I started fiendishly devouring all the neuroscience and playing with a protocol, taking a meditation and backwards engineering it into, I think my brain needs this kind of teaser and this kind of focus. And I think my meditation needs to be more somatically oriented versus escape. Like, I was playing with the form. And then the last seizure I had, I could not breathe on my own, even after the heart starts again and you're supposed to recalibrate. I couldn't breathe on my own. And I was, my husband was pushing on my chest. I stopped breathing multiple times. And I remember bargaining I remember feeling outside of my body saying, that body has been broken for so long. Why would I ever go back to that? Why? I mean, really, exiting was quite peaceful for me. It was reentry that was horrific, and I didn't want to come back in. But I did, because I remembered, okay, daughter upstairs sleeping in the crib, husband pushing on my chest, friends in the room, like with their hands on my feet, just like trying to get me grounded. And I remember coming back in and saying, all right, I need to kick my butt into high gear and take this protocol I'm playing with and make it a real practice, because I don't know when this is going to happen again, but I'm dead when it does. And so I have from now until unknown day, which could be 2 weeks, 6 months, before I get another seizure. And if I'm alone, I'm done. And so I did a real regimented practice. Like every night I was playing with my 5-step protocol to meditate, but really to rehearse a new script, a new scripted response to a seizure catalyst. Like I was invoking the seizure onset feeling in my meditations, and I was rehearsing kicking, punching, screaming, fighting. I was rehearsing the opposite of what my body normally did. So I was in neuroplastic rehearsals in an entrained, induced brain state. That's really what neurosculpting is. I was doing that every day, ended up doing it for 8 months, never knowing if it would work. But at about the 8-month mark, I was in the car and I started to have a seizure. And I thought that's it. I remember hearing myself say no. And then I just thought, well, I'm going to die now. And the script that I had neuroplastically entrained to, right, off hope and desperation, the script that I had been repeating for 8 months kicked in on autopilot and overrode the freeze, shut down, seize. And I literally, my body like exploded. I started punching, kicking, screaming, just like I had rehearsed. But what that did for me was kept my brain oxygenated. It kept me in sympathetic arousal, kept me somatically connected, kept me from going into parasympathetic freeze, which was my default. So I literally unwound the freeze response to that seizure halo in an 8-month period of practice. Had that seizure come at the 6-month mark? I don't know, but it came around 8 months. So I can tell you 8 months of repetition entrained me to a new automated response that overrode my autonomic nervous system vasovagal response. I did not think that was possible. I was desperate enough to hope it was possible. And it worked. And when it worked, just like, so you asked a really interesting question about the energetics. Just like the lightning changed everything, that breakthrough moment was on par with the magnitude of the lightning strike. It changed everything, and I could feel it in my bones. I could feel that after I didn't seize, and I literally just shook in a dark room for hours and hours. I just sat there having neurogenic tremors that I didn't know they had a name at the time, but I was just shaking like that for hours in a dark room. When I was done, I could feel the energetic change. I could feel my bones, everything felt different. I felt like I was in my body. Everything felt grounded, and I knew I was never going to have another seizure again. I just knew it, and I believed it, and I still kept my entrainment practice just in case, and I never had another seizure again. And at that moment, I was like, I just won the lottery. I just broke through, retrained my autonomic nervous system, overrode brainstem vasovagal innervation of a parasympathetic response. Other people can do this too. And I literally said to source, God, whoever, I don't know what that is, but I said to that experience, I just got a second chance. My daughter has a mother. My husband still has a wife. I absolutely need to leave the corporate world and marry myself to this. I consecrated myself to this. And I was just like, I just need to help people not go down that road of not knowing how to be a human in their body. Seems like we should have a manual for this, which is like your podcast, right? Um, we need a manual. And I found a chapter, and I wanted to share that chapter with whoever would listen. And that's what I did.
That's that's amazing. I don't
Yeah.
usually get tingles on this show, but I kind of got tingles there.
Yeah, and it almost reminds me, Lisa, I don't know if you've read the book. I don't know who the author is, but it's called The Body Keeps Score.
Oh God, Bessel van der Kolk is
Yeah.
he's like this little guru that floats right here in my head
Uh-huh.
sometimes. And I'm like, someday when I grow up, I'll be Bessel van der Kolk.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, it reminds me a lot like that. Just that how much our body holds when we go through certain things, and then what that takes to release it. It's very, very fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. He's at the forefront of understanding how to be a mind-body regulated human.
Mhm.
Yeah, he does amazing work.
So let's jump into this then. The typical protocol for meditation that most people think is, you sit in Indian style, you maybe hum a little bit, you almost disassociate, right? There is a disassociative practice that comes with meditation, with the idea that mindfulness almost exists outside of our physical form. And, I think even kind of going back to Buddha, where this, I'm going to survive on one bowl of rice a day. I'm going to almost disassociate from the physical form with the idea that my connection to some source energy exists independent of that physical form. You clearly have proven that that's not the case, and that, we need this mind-body connection. So how do you go about undoing all of this learned behavior that came from meditation early on, and then figuring out just how the hell do we actually do it?
Yeah. Okay, so here's how I like to view things. Everything's about balance. But in order to have intentional balance, you have to understand the system, right? So we live in a spectrum of stress response. We can either be stressed in the arousal direction, and that's our response, and it's agitation, or we can be stressed and then our particular unique body or the circumstance pushes us in the shutdown direction, because that's an equal but opposite coping skill, right? One is a complete sympathetic arousal where the physiology of the body does something very particular. The other is the opposite. Well,
And
if you know,
just to clarify that,
yeah.
Lisa, you talk about that on your website is the arousal oftentimes is the fight or flight.
Yes.
I'm going to fight or I'm going to run away. And
Yes.
then you often said that, in your life, you had the freeze response, which was I'm just going to clam up and not
Yes.
do anything.
Yes. And freeze is wired in since in utero, right? Because think about, babies can't use their arms and legs, but they need a stress response available to them in infancy. So before you can execute a sympathetic arousal and do something with it, you have to be able to protect yourself, and that is innately freeze, right? So we can have a sympathetic arousal as an infant where the heart races, but we can't run or fight, so our nervous system is going to turn around and go in this direction and say, well, I can freeze, right? And you're going to go sudden infant death syndrome, or you're going to go into you're going to go into a natural freeze response that could be normal or exacerbated. So we've got two opposite ends of the spectrum. If you know where you are, if you know I'm in arousal, then the kind of meditation I was trained in is fantastic. It's, wait, you don't have to be agitated in that body. You can exhale and let it go. You can sort of dissociate a little bit so you're not in this full body association state, in which case arousal kind of stress responds very well to transcendental meditation, to yogic kind of gentle movement. Like there's a real great efficacy for that, but not if you're frozen. So if you know, wait a minute, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. Why would I grab a hammer to do the job of a screwdriver? I need to know what tool to reach for. So when you are parasympathetic frozen, the last thing you want to do is be outside of your body, because you already are. Frozen gives rise to a cognitive dissociation state. You are oxygen deprived in the brain. You are in a state of foggy cognitive awareness, and you are reaching that endorphin level of anesthetizing yourself, right? It's what animals do before they're dead. They go into that endorphin phase of freeze so they don't feel, right? So when you're a freezer, either by nature or by a particular circumstance, you have to choose the right tool. And transcendental meditation was not the right tool for me. It was a tool that made me even further disconnected from my body. So really, to answer your question, learning about my nervous system indicated to me I was choosing the wrong tool 90% of the time. No wonder I can't get the job done. Oh, well, then I better find a tool to bring me out of parasympathetic, a tool that is mind active so I keep my brain engaged, somatically oriented so I can feel my body. I can start mapping to I have a body, and creatively engaged so I'm keeping my my frontal brain churning and creating. I'm staying oxygenated and somatically oriented. And that was absolutely the opposite of my ascension training with monks, my TM training, and even my energetic training with the Berkeley Psychic curriculum. All of those have their place and their value, but they're a tool that I was trying to use to get a job done that required a completely different tool. So understanding spectrum and physiology was the key. And so what I created was the kind of experience you could do with your eyes closed. So like, looks like meditation, right? But it's following a very mind active protocol. You're not floating away. You're not clearing your thoughts. You are not, going blank and floating. You're in your body. You're inquiring, you're discovering, you're deciphering, you're letting your active mind be active, and you are constantly going back and forth between mind and body. What's my body doing? What's my mind doing? And it's done very playfully, very creatively. So it feels somewhere between visualization, hypnosis, and storytelling. But because of the protocol, literally because of the first 5 minutes, the sequencing that we prompt people through, we get to what Andrew Huberman says is optimal neuroplasticity state, which is a state of non-sleep deep rest combined with focused attention. The induction of neurosculpting is to position your body towards deeper non-sleep rest, meaning I'm quieting the midbrain and I'm starting to bring softness to my muscles. And then I am activating my focused attention through prefrontal engagement. That combo, Huberman says, that combo is the neuroplastic gold that you want to be in to optimize your states of learning. And what does a pattern need from you to break it or to create a new one? It needs your brain optimized to learn so you can start tinkering with what it is you want to learn and in training to it. So that was a really long-winded answer to your question, but it's very mind active, playful. You can do it standing up, you can do it sitting down, you could do it laying down. It's very audio oriented, so you're listening to someone guiding you through it, so you don't have to do all the work yourself. It's playful, and what I've found is that a lot of our students and my clients who say I can't meditate, after they do neurosculpting, say, oh, but I could do that. And they start unwinding their patterns. They start getting a dialogue with their nervous system. They start feeling the practice of self-regulation. And it doesn't take hours and hours and hours on a mountaintop. We tend to keep our meditations short, 20 minutes. because neuroplasticity rules are shorter frequency, more repetitions. I mean, you know, you guys are health people. You know that you don't have a 5-hour allotment of time to go to the gym and use it all on one day once a month. Like, you're never going to get anywhere. You break that up into more frequently spaced repetitions, and it might be that your workout is a half an hour and it's multiple times a week. So time is very critical. Learning is almost time space dependent, right? We potentiate based on timing. Everything we do is about timing. Our neural firing is about timing. So we want to repeat timing. We want to dose that time with highly efficient tools and practices, and we want to make it pragmatic and repeatable, because that's how neural networks create long-term change. It's over time with repetition. So my days of meditating with the Ashayas, which I loved, but they were like cycle meditation weekends, and I'd be meditating 14 hours on a Saturday, 10 hours on a Sunday, 5 hours on a Friday night. You would get out of that weekend, I don't even know where I was. I was floating in some paradise, which was fantastic, but then I'd have to come back to the real world. And I was actually in training myself at that time that in order to regulate, I needed 30 hours on a weekend to do that. Well, that's not sustainable.
No, it's not. You know, I'm loving this conversation, and I think one of the challenges that we see, and I was thinking about Joe Dispenza's book, you know, and he talks about like these 3-4 hour meditations. I'm like, I'm lucky if I can get 5 minutes, because then all of a sudden I'm like, I got shit to do. Like, my brain goes to all of the things that it's opportunity cost. But one of the things that I keep coming back to in this is the neuroplasticity versus neurosculpting. And it seems to me that as we age, we inevitably move towards grumpy old men. Yeah. This idea that we're so patterned, and anything that breaks that pattern causes some type of chaos, emotional response. Yes. You know, my paper doesn't show up by 6:30, my whole day is ruined. And you kind of see that. So how does neurosculpting and neuroplasticity play into our perception of the world, both emotionally and energetically?
Yeah, well, I mean, you bring up a really good point. The brain is wired to prefer and default to predictability, right? It's how we become efficient in anything. So we exist with a paradox inside of our head. We are wired for predictability so we can automate so that we don't have to think about it, so we can go learn more, right? That's why we predict.
And that's energy conservation within the brain.
Energy conservation, absolutely. But at the same time, the new learning happens from states of change. And that is a paradox. So if we think about survival brain, prediction is gold to the survival brain, because I know I know the lay of the land, I know how to behave, and I'm safe, right? Change, whether good or bad, is a potential threat to prediction. So any change can cause the brain, you said chaos, right? Any potential change can cause the brain to go into chaos/threat response. So change, the more we are in our patterns, change becomes more and more a potential threat. And we get very rigid. Neurosculpting helps us become very comfortable with novelty, because built into step 2 of the process is inducing novelty through certain kinds of prefrontal engagement, so that little moments of novel engagement in your neurosculpting practice gets that familiar, right? We're playing with the paradox. So the more you get comfortable with novelty, the more resilience you access during real change in real time. So if we've got a student, they may not even be working on anything specific. They may be doing a neurosculpting meditation where they just sort of release their junk, right? But because they're moving through the steps, and one of the steps is teasing them with novelty in fun, playful ways, what they're doing over time, they don't even realize it, is building a resilience and a familiarity with novelty. So they start to see side effects of their meditation over time. They start to see, I wasn't so thrown by that thing that normally sends me into a fit. Or, wow, I did have an anxiety attack, but I was able to regulate in 2 days instead of 5. They start to see that the form itself is entraining the brain, even outside of the specific pattern they're working on. It's like once you get the form of a body movement, the grace starts to come even in other movements because the form is embedded. It's the same with the brain. So, I grew up dancing, and until I could find my center of gravity and hold my core, everything was effortful, dangerous, off balance, laborious, and I had to fake a lot of it. But then I learned the one form, right? Suck in the core, hold the center of gravity. And now it wasn't just my turns that were more balanced. It was my grace, because I could feel my stability, like it starts to bleed out in all these other directions. So it is the form itself that holds so much of the efficacy, but then it's what you do inside the form with the patterns you particularly want to shift that creates the very targeted change.
That's amazing. It in a lot of ways, I was thinking about it, and especially as you were talking about your experience in the car when you had your seizure. It's almost in the context of military application, right? You train, and you train, knowing that no battle plan survives the first contact with the enemy, and then all of a sudden you have that, you have all of that training to fall back on. So regardless of the outside stimuli, you are prepared to deal with whatever inevitable change that that comes. And I think looking back on the last 13 months of COVID, nobody was prepared for this. Like, there's no way that we were ever going to be like, oh, I guess the world's going to end. So I keep, as you talk about this, I keep thinking, like, where were you 14 months ago, and before the shit hit the fan?
Yeah, actually, what's funny is, I've been here for decades, and COVID happened, and my private practice exploded. Like, it took COVID for some people to realize that they were not resilient and that they needed to learn how to find a way to be self-reliant, self-resilient, because it's really easy to feel resilient when you've got your perceived stability pieces in place, and maybe one of them is threatened here and again, like, okay, so I got a little sick, but my work's in place and my social world's in place. Well, COVID just wiped out every perceived realm of stability we hid behind, because it's all an illusion anyway. And I know this from having flatlined multiple times. Tomorrow does not exist for me, yet it's what drives me. So we've got COVID now that does that to everybody. Everything you thought was stable, nope, not there. And now if you're not self-reliant and you haven't built your self-regulation and resilience, you're going to crumble in ways you didn't know you could. And people just threw their hands up, and it was just like, my phone ringing off the hook, please help, please help, please help. And sometimes, or I'm going to say something that might be annoying to the self-help industry, but I'm going to say it because I have to say it. There's a chunk of the self-help industry for all good intentions, but is candy. It's candy. It's self-resilience in times where there is no threat. That's candy. That's, I could have it if I want. I don't have to have it. And tastes really good, right? I'm spinach, right? Neuroplasticity work, anyone who's doing neuroplasticity work, cognitive behavioral therapy, that kind of stuff, that stuff's spinach. It doesn't taste good because you have to do it every day, whether you like it or not, and you don't see results right away, and you don't get to look pretty doing it. It's spinach. And you have to be ready for spinach, or you're going to run away from it. COVID made people ready for spinach.
Well, I love that you said that. And I have a massive problem with the self-help industry in the sense that it's window dressing in the sense that, you know what, if, if the chips are really down, you need professional help. Self-help oftentimes doesn't get you there. There's no feedback loop that says you're doing it right, you're doing it wrong. Professional help, like with what you guys do, changes that paradigm. It says that, okay, we are here to help you, we are here to guide you. But the self-help industry, it's like, well, is anybody else coming to you for help? So then why do you think you can help yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like things are gateways to each other. So I feel like we need that. We need pieces of the industry to just drop a little awareness in people's laps around I can change. That's like, for me, that's what self-help is the realization that I can change and I can be an agent of that change. And from there, now I want tools, and I have to have tangible tools to make those changes. And that's sort of like the next phase of self-help is, where are those tools, and can I get them? And I might need to try a few different kinds of tools before I find one that works for me. And then there is the long-term change, which gets you so changed you don't need the industry anymore, which is my ultimate goal. And it's antithetical to what people see in the industry. It's, even when people come to my website, they make so many assumptions without knowing what we do or even my philosophy. But my philosophy is this: I don't want to see you again. I don't want to see you in 5,000 courses. In fact, if I do, I'm failing, because I'm a teacher and I'm supposed to teach you how to be self-reliant. My clients, I don't want them long-term. I don't do year-long engagements and this program for 9 months. I don't do that stuff, not because it's wrong, but because I'm over here in wanting your self-sufficiency to be the thing that you experience. And that means you better not need me anymore. You better have mastered your own self-practice of neurosculpting, that you can apply it to anything, anywhere, anytime, and you don't need me behind you telling you how to do that. Of course, that takes a while to do that, but some people get self-sufficient to their satisfaction in a couple sessions. Some people take 2 courses and they're like, yeah, I'm good. This changed me forever. Some people want to stay for the long term, not because they feel not self-sufficient, but because they feel like, I want to share this with others. And now I need to learn the nuances of like helping other people. But ultimately, I don't want you to come back to my classes. No offense, but that's where I'm at.
Could you help out the chiropractic industry?
Well, I would love to help everyone everywhere across the planet, which, much to my marketing department's chagrin, doesn't work. Like, I truly believe I'm supposed to help everybody. It's this utopian dream of mine where like, I will help everybody. And then I don't know how to talk to my audience, because I'm like, yes, you and you and you, I can help you all.
The funny thing is we're much the same way. And I think a big part of that just comes with the idea that we can have a ripple effect that's so profound that it expands beyond, our sightline, beyond our lifeline, our lifetime. And I think that comes so much with what you're saying is that we have to be able to help people get to the point where they're helping themselves. And it should not be based off of the commercial aspects of, both of our collective industries. And whether that's the diet, the health industry, there's this idea that we only have a certain number of people that we can help. And if we get them into a specific funnel, we have to keep them there paying the mortgage. But the truth is that if we do it properly, we send them on their way so that we can continue to help more and more people.
Yes, it's why I have an influx of beginners often. It's because people don't need to stay with me very long. Of course, we do have advanced students and everything, but that's not the MO, right? It's interesting you said ripple effect, because that's the name of the parent company my parent company that owns all of everything, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to just drop the stone and then everything else just ripple out from there, and I don't have to be there to do it.
That's kind of what we want is same thing as, you find those, you find those stones and you put them in the right place at the right time, and you just let it reinforce, until there's a collective change that we all need. And I think COVID, for better or worse, has created this giant, massive light on all of the problems, both intellectually, emotionally, energetically, and physically. And yet we're still not elevating the proper conversation about what we need to do. Because in the grand scheme of things, is COVID that bad? It's bad, but COVID 24 or 25 is going to be a hell of a lot worse. And if we're not energetically prepared for that, if we're not physically prepared for that, if we're not emotionally prepared for that, that's the one that's going to clean our clock.
Yeah, I feel like I break everything down into limbic response, right? Midbrain threat response. It can be productive in that it gives us a little boost of adrenaline and cortisol, and we need that sometimes to run the body, or we'll just sit on the couch forever. So it's not an inherent evil to have a limbic response. But if we live in a limbic lens where everything is making us respond in some way as a threat, we're not ever going to change. And I'll stand behind that, because limbic dominance creates this need for predictability. That is not what we're given or guaranteed as humans. Nobody in the history of humankind has been guaranteed predictability. You can't predict the sun will rise. You can hope it will. You can go off statistical evidence that it's likely to, so you don't worry about it. You're not guaranteed you're going to be able to breathe in a second. And I work with quadriplegics, so I can tell you, nobody ever thinks they can't walk or breathe on their own or move their hands tomorrow if they're able-bodied today. It's just not what you think. And it just really happens to people. So limbic behavior doesn't leave room for adaptability. And then you get hit with COVID-1 or COVID whatever, or pandemic 25, and you haven't gotten comfortable with adaptability, you're not going to be able to come through it in a way that feels good to you or your family or your friends or your stability or your emotional sense of wellness. It's just not going to happen.
It makes me think of the Dragons of Eden, which I think was Carl Sagan's college thesis, and he talks so much about reptilian complex, and how we're as a human beings, we've evolved past that, but yet somehow we keep creating these situations where we fall back to that limbic response. We fall back to this reptilian complex where it is a more chemical existence than it is a profound, thoughtful, how do we work through this? How do we become the manifestors of our own destiny? And whether that's being a quadriplegic, whether that's just, surviving COVID-19 or 25, we have this ability as human beings to do that, but we just have somehow cocked it all up and not given ourselves the appropriate tools, which is what you really offer, is the chance to view the world through a completely different lens and make some proactive changes that I think a lot of people just, they freaking need right now.
It's so funny. It reminds me of I think, therefore I am. And I'm going to call BS on that, because we think we've evolved out of reptilian, but thinking doesn't give you practices. Practices give you practice, right? So if you look at muscles, let's pretend the brain's a muscle. We are midbrain efficient. That muscle responds, but prior to conscious thought, right? It has neural firing that's faster than conscious thought, measurably so, right? So the fastest, strongest, most energy efficient muscle is the midbrain muscle. The slower muscle, if you will, it's not a muscle, is the prefrontal cortex, the neocortex. It's slower. Why is it slower? Because it's computing abstract information. It's computing empathy and goal setting and dream building, things that are not measurable, but that we have to use to make ourselves feel civilized, right? And it's the thinking mind. Well, the thinking mind is not who I am. The thinking mind is who I hope to be. But unless and until I develop that muscle with practices and neuroplastic engagement, then who I will be in any moment is going to be dependent on the energy efficient speed of my midbrain. So I can think all I want. I could read every self-help book. I could go to every motivational seminar. I get all the shoulds. In fact, we already have all the shoulds. Shoulds don't get you changing your behavior. They get you mad at yourself for not changing your behavior in the face of the list of shoulds you have. Thinking doesn't change you. Thinking invites you to now strategize practices to change you. So I don't know that we're evolved out of lizard existence yet. I think we're in both. And we've tricked ourselves into believing because we can think of the way we'd like to be, that means we can be that without putting practices in place. This hit me hard because I was a voracious reader. I have probably over 1,000 books in my house that I've just like read over my lifetime. And I was reading The Journey by Tom Brown. Do you know Tom Brown? Who Tom Brown is? Okay. I read his books, and he's this amazing survivalist. He's like the most insanely magical survivalist. He can go out into the woods. He could track a mouse across a gravel football field for real. He's really done stuff like that. I'm reading his books. I'm like, look at all the information I have. I know how to make a fire out of bow drill. I know how to survive in the woods because I read it in a book. And I'm sitting in a reclining chair. This was many years ago. This was actually 2003. And I remember having this image of how I could talk about all this stuff at a cocktail party and be really interesting. And then I went, but can I do it? And my answer was, oh my God, no. And in the back of the book was a stamp. And the stamp was like Tracker School and their phone number. And that's where it all changed for me in terms of understanding a practice. I thought, I'm one of those really obnoxious armchair know-it-alls. Oh my God, I cannot survive in the woods. So I picked up the phone, I called, and I'm like, I need to come study with you. And I just gave them my credit card. And 2 months later, I'm on a flight to the Pine Barrens in New Jersey to learn from Tom Brown, because I don't know how to burrow into a debris hut and keep myself thermically balanced in the freezing cold. And I don't know how to eat bugs. And I don't know how to brain tan a hide. And interesting fact, every animal has enough brains to tan their own hide. Just so you know.
What does that mean?
You
That
create a
means
slurry, right?
We have enough oil, fat in our own brains to tan our full hide. So like when you skin an animal and you want to make leather, you use their brains to do it. You use the oil from the brains to actually soak into the skin and make leather. This is what they do in the wild to make clothing. And every animal has just enough to turn their own hide into life-preserving self-protection.
I actually read a book on this where it was, if you killed a deer, you could use the skull to create the slurry to tan its own hide.
Yeah, well, in Tracker School, I didn't get to the advanced levels, but it starts teaching you how to use every part of the animal. So there's reverence and there's not waste, and you don't have to indiscriminately kill for food. Like, it's a whole philosophy, but I realized knowing means nothing. I would die in the woods having read 5 of his books, but I would survive in the woods having gone to one of his workshops.
Oh, sure. I even think about, reading a book on how to fly an airplane. I would still feel so uncomfortable. Even if I read it 400 times, I would still feel so uncomfortable just getting in an airplane and doing it for the first time. And it's definitely is about application. It's
the door opener, but you have to walk through it with the practices.
Mr. Miyagi said in The Next Karate Kid, ambition without knowledge is like a boat on dry land.
Yes.
And that's Mr. Miyagi. So you know that it's profound. But I think it always comes back to this. There's so many practices that we need to implement. But, self-help books, the commercialization of our existence has put us in a place where we think that because I read the survival book, I can go out and survive. It's because I read the parenting book that I'm going to be the best parent in the world. But the application and the practice is what drives efficacy. So Yeah, I love the conversation, and I love that we're really talking about neuroplasticity and kind of this neurosculpting. Before we run out of time, Lisa, I kind of want to just get into like what does the process ultimately look like? You've got your steps, you've got working with your institute, but if someone's really looking at their life right now and saying, I don't necessarily have the tools or the meditation practice that I have or the app that's supposedly great for my meditation isn't working, how does someone really go about recognizing that they need this and then really moving forward, picking up that stamp in the back of this podcast and saying I want to connect with you?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing is recognizing that if your life isn't changing in the direction of resilience and regulation, then you could benefit from this. That's the first awareness. And then to do it in a way that works with your budget and your schedule, because otherwise you will not maintain it, right? I could charge a gazillion dollars for my real expensive course, but if it doesn't land with you, it doesn't work. So we have a slurry of entry level experiences that for people with crunched time and crunched budget to get you feeling self-reliant right out of the gate. So I would say this is any of my books on Audible. There's 4 neurosculpting books on Audible. Because the reason I say those books is because they walk you through neurosculpting meditations. So there is a practice in each of them. I would also say if you don't want to learn the why and how behind it, you just want the form, the practice, then you could either go to the website, neurosculpting.com, and there's a couple meditations that you can download, or you can get the NeuroPraxis app in the App Store, which is a little bit more specific to chronic illness people, but super helpful. If you do want, well, I kind of want to learn a little bit of the application so I have a context, so I know how to use this in different situations, then you take our beginner course, which is not a gazillion hours. It's not a weekend immersion. It's a self-paced course on the website. It's super affordable. It's the beginner neurosculpting course. You take that, and in that course, I give you the how, the why, the form, the guided meditations, the worksheets. And once you're done with that, you practice and you feel it and you use it. And you may never need to take another course with us again, or you may want to go further. But these are the entry points. And if you're someone who's like, I won't do it myself, I just won't. Well, we have practitioners, and they all work remotely. So you can go to the website, find a practitioner to do private sessions with you based on your needs. I do take on new clients on occasion. So those are the different entry points.
Wonderful.
And it seems like it's just as important for people who necessarily aren't treating a condition or an illness or something. I mean, even just if you think life's going good, you want to be prepared as well. So this truly does seem like it is for everyone, regardless of what you're going through or not going through.
I do believe it's for everyone. And I see it in my practice. It's been 15 years. And my practice is everything from the entrepreneur who wants to get out of the pattern that's been sabotaging them, who doesn't feel like there's anything wrong, right? Just wants to be better, more efficient with their mindsets, all the way to my spinal cord injury, my traumatic brain injury people who are like, I am physically compromised and that's a pattern, and my emotional response to that's a pattern, and I'd like to ease up some of this. All the way to, I work with first responders. I've been working with them for 15 years, to my police departments that I go into, and we are looking at how to help with their PTSD or their trigger happy entrainment. That's a terrible term. Let me rephrase that. Their leap to tactical response when not necessary. That's a pattern too. And I help officers with that. So it doesn't matter where you are. Your nervous system, your mammalian nervous system, is defaulting to the most efficient patterns you've created. And if you've created some bad ones that get in your way mentally, emotionally, or physically, you need this.
And I think that it's safe to say that we've all created some type of pattern. I think when we even look at Freudian psychology, it's our ego is there to protect us in the beginning and ultimately becomes a problem later on in life. And so most of us carry from infants to adolescence into adulthood some patterns that need to be reshaped. And you know, the biggest challenge for most of us is recognizing that we have a problem. And then secondly, it's finding the appropriate tools to do that. Obviously, Lisa, you've created an amazing platform based off of your experience. And as we've said time and time again on the show, your mess becomes your message. I think, getting struck by lightning is usually a great start to, understanding the energy of all things. And we are energetic beings. And so, having that kind of energetic trauma and being able to pull yourself out of it is obviously a testament to the work that you put into it. And I got to tell you, I want to go on the website and check some of the stuff out. I'm pretty stoked about it.
Yes, go to the website, check it out. And I'm excited because I'm bringing live classes back. It's been a year of not in person or not teaching out at different centers. And, I too would go on tour and do this teaching. And that's my favorite, is to interact with people. But also even the group classes online. I took a big hiatus from that this year, but all of that comes back. So that's ways for us to engage more. And I love that. I'm so excited about that part too.
There's probably a collective energy that happens when you do that. Is that ripple effect just gets that much bigger when you can energetically connect with someone in the same room and see that transition once they leave that room into their daily lives?
Yes, it's big. And also to tune into what's not landing with them, and how can I say it differently? When you take a self-paced course, if it doesn't land with you, I'm not there to say it differently. So that in-person thing is really important for me.
Cool. All right, Lisa. Well, we will definitely put all of your information in the show notes. We'd love to share what you're doing, your mission, your quest, shall we say, with our audience, and hope that they found this as insightful as we did, and that they can take action to move from limbic into a little bit more neocortex, and let's get to thinking and feeling and emoting and energetically fixing our problems instead of relying on the reptilian complex.
Yeah. Or just regular self-help books.
Yes, or regular self-help
We need
books.
application.
Application. And thanks for helping put various chapters of the manual to being a human out in your podcast.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning into another edition of the Complete Human Podcast with your hosts,
Jana Breslin.
and Evan DeMarco. We will see you next week.
Bye, everyone.